Hi there, I'm Savannah Mexto with Mannor Law Group, and I'm excited to welcome you to another Webinar Wednesday with esteemed elder law and estate planning attorney Robert Mannor. This week, Bob is going to dive deep into the importance of asset protection and a few potentially dangerous mistakes he's seen throughout the years. Before I pass the torch to Bob, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping details. First, a quick disclaimer, and Bob will talk more about this later, but today's webinar will be informative. You will learn something, but you're not going to receive specific legal advice. I encourage you, if you are looking for specific legal advice for your situation, to contact us after the webinar. Also note that today's webinar is recorded. We'll send out a replay link later this week that you can share with family and friends. Also, if you have any questions today during the webinar, I encourage you to use the chat box. Please put your questions in the chat box, and we will make sure that we leave time at the end of today's webinar to go over those questions. If for some reason we don't get to your question during the webinar, we will contact you afterwards to make sure that you get an answer. Now, why should you listen to what the folks at Mannor Law Group have to say? First, you should note that we're a nationally recognized and respected elder law and estate planning firm. All three of our attorneys are accredited by the Veterans Administration to assist veterans with claims and appeals. Attorney Bob Mannor is nationally board certified as an elder law attorney by the National Elder Law Foundation. He's one of only 19 attorneys in Michigan to achieve this designation. He is currently on the executive board of the State Bar of Michigan Elder Law and Disability Rights Section and past president of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys Michigan chapter. Lastly, Mannor Law Group is honored by readers of our local paper as the best or favorite law firm for the last 8 years in a row. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Attorney Bob Mannor.
Hi, folks. Okay, so this is going to be a good one. I always like to kind of deal with some of the things that are pretty well accepted thoughts that people have. And we see this every single day. Pretty much every day we get a call and says, well, why can't I just do this? Why can't I just do this to protect my assets? Now, we're going to be talking about this mostly from the standpoint of protecting assets to pay for long-term care. As Savannah said, we always have to put in a disclaimer there. Simply, the disclaimer is that you shouldn't rely on this as legal advice. Everything has to be specific to your specific needs and your specific circumstances. So you can't rely on this as legal advice for your specific needs. But we're going to get right into this. And the most common thing and mistake that people make when it comes to trying to protect their assets is either trying to hide their money or giving away their money. So very common, where folks will say, okay, well, I'm just going to start giving my money away to my kids. They're going to hold on to it in case I need it, and therefore it will be protected. The problem with that is there's there's kind of two different things, giving it away and hiding it. So let's say you actually gave it away. You gave it to the kids. They're holding on to it with the idea that they will return it to you if you need it. The problem with that is there's this thing called this look back, right? And so both for veterans benefits now and for Medicaid benefits, if in fact you gave money away within 5 years of needing care, needing nursing home care, needing care, they will see that and they will penalize you for that. And the penalty is often worse than the benefit. In fact, almost always it's going to be worse than the benefit of it. So this might be something, I guess it's probably something that people have done through the years as they got older. They said, you know what, I'm just going to start transferring assets to my kids. And you'll even see lawyers and accountants and bankers and other people that are smart about money saying, oh, you can give away $10,000 each year to your kids, each kid or something like that. Now it's $14,000 or $15,000 that you can give away. But the answer is that's not for asset protection purposes. That's a tax rule, okay? And what's interesting about that tax rule, even though everybody says it, so you'll hear people say, oh, you should be giving away money to your kids to protect, to pay less taxes. And the answer is, for most of us, that's actually going to have zero tax effect, zero tax benefits for giving money away each year. And it's almost common knowledge. Everybody knows that this is true. You should be giving away, if you got extra money, give it away to save on taxes. And the answer is, at least if you're in Michigan and you die in Michigan, a resident of Michigan, they're not going to pay taxes on that, and it's not going to change the taxes because there is no gift or estate tax in Michigan until you get up into the $11 million range. So if you got $11 million, yes, maybe we need to do a strategy or a plan for minimizing your estate or gift taxes. But if it's under that, people still do this. They say, oh, and your banker, your lawyer, your accountant, a lot of people are still telling you, oh, $10,000, $14,000, $15,000 each year to the kids. And the bottom line is, not only is it not going to help you for taxes, it's going to hurt you if you go into a nursing home in the next 5 years, if you need home care or Medicaid or veterans benefits or those types of things. 3 years for veterans benefits, 5 years for Medicaid. And so the most common thing that people do, the most common myth or the most common mistake that they make is giving money away. The other one, of course, is hiding money, right? And so people will say, okay, I don't need to do any of this fancy legal stuff because I just took all my money and put it in my mattress. That's what the picture here is hiding money in your mattress. And obviously people don't put their money in their mattress, but they say, oh, I bought gold bars and I have gold bars in my gun safe, or I have money stashed up in my house, large sums of money in my house. And the answer to that is that's not a good idea. Okay, not only is it not safe for you, these are dangerous times. And so if somebody finds out that you have that money there, you're a target. It's really a bad idea. You can't recover it. It's really just a bad idea. If you have money in your house, gold bars in your house, things like that, a bad idea for your safety, your personal safety. But it's worse than that because it doesn't help you either unless you want to commit a felony. And so I'm half joking here, but it's not a joke at all, really, because the reality of this is if you applied for veterans benefits and if you applied for Medicaid or any other programs that would help you pay for care, they're going to ask you, do you have cash on hand? And what that means is, do you have gold bars on hand? Do you have cash stored up in the house? And you could lie and tell them no, but there's a term for that. They call it a felony. It's fraud, right? On a federal form. Not a good idea. Now, are you going to get caught? I don't know if you're going to get caught. I would still not recommend doing that. You're going to need a whole different type of an attorney if you get caught with that kind of a thing. So the bottom line is it's just not worth it. It's not worth it to break the law. It's not worth it to commit fraud. And so hiding money won't work. Say, oh, it's off the grid, but it's still, you're applying for this program. If you were applying for veterans benefits, applying for Medicaid to help pay for your care, you have to tell the truth. And if you don't tell the truth, then you're committing a felony, and we don't want to do that. So hiding money doesn't work. Giving away money doesn't work. We're going to talk about the different techniques that we have to protect your assets, because for the most part, especially with given some time, we can protect your assets, okay? We can still qualify for veterans benefits or Medicaid benefits. It's just these aren't the right ways. You do need a lawyer. I know a lot of people say, oh, I can just do it myself. Well, okay, there's some things you just shouldn't do yourself, right? And this is one of them. Trying to give it away, trying to hide money, it's going to cause you more problems than it'll help you with the vast majority of time. So that's my first one. The second one is adding kids' names to accounts or deeds. All right, this is an extremely common one. And people think that somehow that's going to protect their assets from having to spend down for Medicaid or help them qualify for different things. And the reality of this is, number one is it's too dangerous. So it doesn't work. So there's two things. It doesn't work and it's too dangerous. It doesn't work. I'll come back to that one. It's too dangerous, meaning that anything can happen to your kids. And if your kids' names are on the account or on the house, hopefully not, then anything bad that happens to them could affect you. So if they get divorced, your money could be exposed to their divorce. If they don't pay their credit card bill, if their house gets foreclosed, if they, if anything bad happens, what if they got sick? A lot of times we just assume it's going to be the parents that get sick or the parents that go to a nursing home. What if they got in a car accident? What if they got sued? What if they got sick? What if their spouse got sick? We have cases, plenty of cases where it was the spouse that got sick and had to go to a nursing home, and the healthy spouse's parents had put their name on it. So parents put daughter on an account or on the farm or something like that on the deed, and then daughter's husband goes to a nursing home. Guess what? The farm is now exposed to daughter's husband's nursing home costs. Okay, so putting kids' names on accounts is just a really bad idea. There's much better options to solve the problem, because why do people do that? They say, well, I want it to go to them after I die. Well, that's what we do. That's what trusts are for. That's what sometimes wills are for. Oh, I want them to have access to be able to help me with it if I need to spend the money, or if I get sick, or if I'm on vacation. Great, that's what trusts are for. That's what powers of attorney are for, okay? Putting kids' names on there is not a good plan because it exposes that money to any problems that the kids have, and sometimes they're just not predictable. We can't predict if somebody's going to get in a car accident. We can't predict if somebody is going to get sick, right? We can't predict the future for them. And so we don't want to put them in a situation, we don't want to put you in a situation where something bad that happens to your kids now affects your finances, okay? So that's just a really bad idea. So number one is don't do it because it's dangerous. Number two is it doesn't work because, at least for Medicaid purposes, it's a little bit different for veterans benefits. But for Medicaid purposes, having your kids' names on it, what that does is it makes it exposed to both. It says, okay, if you're in a nursing home and you want to try to qualify for Medicaid, it's going to say all that money counts against parents. It also counts against kids. They count 100%. They don't say, okay, well, it doesn't count because kids' names are on it. It doesn't work that way. And they also don't say that only half of it counts because kids' names are on it. Nope, doesn't work that way either. They're going to count 100% against you. And then if your child went into a nursing home, they're going to count it 100% against them, even though it's not their money. Now, of course, we've got ways around this. We can fix most things. It certainly just puts yourself in a worse position. So we have people, all of the things I'm going to tell you about, all 5 of the problems and assumptions that people make about this stuff, we've experienced all the time, and it's my job to fix those. Okay, that's one of the reasons why you need attorneys, but is to fix things that you did wrong. But even when you do everything right, for Medicaid and veterans benefits, often you're going to need our help. But the idea here is don't get too stressed about it. To the extent that you've done this, I would suggest that we fix it, that we don't leave it. If we made a mistake on this, we don't continue that mistake, right? So that we fix it sooner than later. I always say, can't worry too much about yesterday. It already happened, and we'll have to deal with that. Whatever happened. We're gonna have to deal with that. What we can do is fix tomorrow, right? So if you have added kids' names to your deeds, if you have added kids' names to your accounts, something you should probably come in, and we're gonna work through that, and hopefully they'll sign off on that. Because if it's on a deed, kids could say no. They could say no, it's mine now. In fact, there's plenty of cases actually. I just remember one from a couple of years ago where a mom had put her kid's son's name on her house because that's what her grandmother did, and that's what her parents had did. And so just because we did things in the past doesn't mean it's still a good idea. And in this case, it clearly wasn't a good idea because son, you're not gonna believe this, son tried to evict his mom from her own house. And his argument was, hey, this is my house now. You quit claim deed this house to me, so it's my house now. Son said this, and he literally filed an eviction, and it went through the courts and made some news. And the court was able to help her, but that's an issue. That's a real issue. If you add somebody's name to a deed, you don't fully own it anymore. You're completely dependent on them doing the right thing, along with all the other problems that it creates. It creates tax problems and all these other issues. But for our purposes today, the main thing is it's not going to help you. It's not going to work to protect those assets. All right, so the next one here, I get this from time to time. This is a little bit less common, but people assume, and I actually see this with social workers sometimes, where they say, okay, well, we just told the person to put everything in the spouse's name. So husband has severe Alzheimer's and needs nursing home care, and wife, they say, okay, just put everything in wife's name. That doesn't work. Bottom line is it doesn't work. There's a couple different things there. Number one is they count for Medicaid and veterans benefits. They count all of the assets of either spouse. So it's not going to help you any. It's not going to solve the problem. Doesn't provide any protections, right? Doesn't mean that we can't do it. It's something that we do. It's part of the process, actually. It's just that in and of itself won't solve the problem. Okay, you're still going to need legal planning to be able to qualify one spouse for Medicaid. The other thing that people always forget about is it's the healthy spouse that dies first most of the time. When we have a healthy spouse that's the caregiver, we see this all the time, right? So we have a married couple, they've been married forever, and one spouse gets very sick, whether it's Alzheimer's or dementia or a stroke or fall, or whatever it is, and then we rely entirely on the other spouse to provide for their care 24 hours a day. And that can work sometimes, especially for a short period of time, if it was just a fall or something like that. But when it's an ongoing thing and we're expecting that person to provide 24-hour care for the rest of their spouse's life, well, we know what happens then. Most of the time, more than 50% of the time, that spouse will die first. A healthy spouse will die first, because we're putting so much pressure and so much stress and so much work and so much not getting sleep at night and everything else on that healthy spouse to provide 24-hour care for their dementia spouse, or their Alzheimer's spouse, their Parkinson's spouse, their spouse that has stroke. And it's just too much. And we know statistically that's what happens. And so, yeah, putting all the assets in one person's name isn't going to solve the problem for a variety of reasons. Number one, it actually doesn't solve the problem. It still counts for Medicaid purposes and veterans purposes. Secondly, we're just making an assumption that that spouse is not going to have their own problems, like death or getting sick or other problems. So that doesn't solve the problem either. All right, so the next one we have, now we're going to get into, not only am I going to tell you the problem, but I'm going to actually kind of talk to you a little bit about some of the solutions here. So hopefully this will be helpful to you. So number 4 is spending down assets to qualify for Medicaid. Almost every single call that we get that says, I was told to call you, I'm not sure why, but the social worker, the nurse, my friend, my neighbor, the other person at the care facility or at the hospital, they said to call Bob's office, Mannor Law Group, because I need Medicaid. I'm not sure what you can do for me because I've already done my own research and it says I have to spend down to $2,000. Okay, so that's almost every call we get. It goes something like that, is to say, I've already done my own research. I've already figured this out. We're just gonna have to spend down. I've done all the math. We're gonna spend down. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna move them over to the assisted living. We're gonna spend down. We've only got 6 months worth of money. Then we're gonna get Medicaid and then everything will be fine, right? No, that's not the way it works. And so the idea of spending down assets to qualify for Medicaid is actually a bad choice, even though that's what you're told to do over and over again. Everybody, if you Google it, if you talk to folks, they'll say, oh, just spend down and then qualify. The problem is so many people that do that still don't qualify. There's so many technical requirements, and they're very bureaucratic when it comes to the Medicaid process, that many people, they do everything that they were told to do, and then they still don't qualify because of a minor technicality. Now we've got a big problem because we spent down all the assets and we can't pay for that time period where we don't qualify. And my strong advice is never do this, right? Never spend down the assets. Now there are some times where we're going to do a strategic spend down so that we can protect certain assets, okay? And so that the idea there is that it doesn't have to be, we're not spending down to $2,000. We're going to be doing it very precisely, and I'll show you that in just a minute here. But the idea behind it is when somebody says spend down for Medicaid, they're probably doing it wrong, which is going to be, actually, I'm going to show you on my next number 5 is going to be why people tend to do the spend down wrong, because spend down means a very certain thing. It means spending it on a very specific situation, and the spend down doesn't start or count until all of those things line up. So people think they're spending down by paying for care at home. They think they're spending down by paying for care at an assisted living or independent living. And typically, those things can be spent down if done right, but most of the time they're not. And so they think they're spending down. They get down to a different asset level, and they say we should be all set. And the answer is no, none of that counted as spend down. Now we got to spend down again. Okay, so I'll give you some examples in that in just a second. All right, so here's the examples. So how does Medicaid work? I decided not to include veterans benefits on this because veterans benefits, I had some slides on veterans benefits, but the truth is veterans benefits, we've got one option, plan 3 years in advance, okay? That's the option for veterans benefits right now. At least that's the safe option for veterans benefits. We plan to protect the assets 3 years in advance, and if we don't have 3 years, then we got to spend on the assets. And so this is for Medicaid. And there's a big X over the screen, right? The big X over the screen, what is that for? That's because I'm saying don't do this. This is without good planning. Without good planning, you have to spend down to this, these things. A house, they take all of your income except for $2 a day. They leave with $2,000 in total countable assets. Problem is, you say, okay, well, that's great. I still get the house. Well, how are you going to pay for the house if they only leave you with $2 a day? How you can pay for the taxes, insurance, all those types of things. Plus, if you don't protect the house, they can come and take the house after you die, right? They call that estate recovery. And so none of this is the way that we're going to do it if you work with us, okay? If we needed to qualify for benefits, we're not going to use these default rules. You can have one car, one prepaid funeral, one life insurance policy with a face value of under $1,500 or under in household goods, but pretty much everything else is lost. So that's the way not to do it, okay? So that's the spend down. If somebody says spend down, that's often what they mean. We don't want that. Okay, this is for a single person to be a little bit different for a married couple. Sometimes they say half the assets, but that's actually a misnomer. That's not correct for a married couple. Hold on. I'm in a little trouble here. Okay, there we go. So this is the end result, okay? The goal of today's webinar, I'm sure if you've watched other webinars, I've given you some details about how we do this. I'm not going to go into all of the how, I'm just going to say the what, what's the end result? And typically with a Medicaid plan, we're able to protect all of the assets in favor of a healthy spouse. So if we've got what we call community spouse, meaning one spouse needs Medicaid and the other one doesn't. Now, Medicaid could be in the home with waiver services. It could be in the home with PACE services. It could be in a nursing home. Okay, those are the 3 Medicaid programs for long-term care. And so the idea here is that most of the time, we can protect 100% of the assets in favor of the healthy spouse. And often we can protect some of the income, okay, the monthly income that comes in. So let's say we have a married couple, one of them makes $800 a month in Social Security, the other one makes $3,000 a month in pension and Social Security, and the one with $3,000 a month ends up going into the nursing home. Some of that income can be diverted over to the healthy spouse, the one that only makes $800 a month. Okay, so we can protect 100% of the assets and some of the income, depending on the circumstances. What about for a single person? Okay, for a single person, typically we can protect the house, a car, and about 50% of the assets. Now, this is for a single person, all right? So they're single, they're a widow, their spouse has already died, and for a single person, we protect about half of the assets. It doesn't sound great, but the alternative, remember the alternative? This was the alternative here, right? This is the alternative. We have to spend on a few $1,000s. And so now when we say, okay, well, we can protect 50% of the assets under that scenario, often we can do better than 50%. 50% is just kind of the bottom line. So that's where sometimes spend down would come in. So as I was talking about earlier, with a married couple, they'll say, oh, you got to spend down to $100,000, or you got to spend down to $50,000 or whatever. Where people get the spend down wrong is they say, okay, we're just going to spend down. So we're going to keep dad at home, and we're going to pay for round-the-clock care. It's going to cost $10,000 a month for round-the-clock care, and we'll spend down to that number within 6 months. With $60,000, we'll spend down to that number in 6 months. And what happens is they spend that $10,000 every month for 6 months, spent $60,000, and now they apply for Medicaid and they say, oh no, now you have to spend down to $50,000, and you have to spend another $50,000 because you weren't spending down properly. You weren't spending down on the right things that's counted as spend down. There's all these things that have to line up first for the spend down to count. All right. The idea here is there's a time period at which they count the assets. And they got to count the assets twice. So when they count the assets, they're looking at your, potentially your house or real estate. They're looking at your bank accounts, your life insurance, your investments, pretty much anything that has any cash value. So we look at that and we say, okay, we count it once at what they call the snapshot date. And then they count it again when we apply for Medicaid. And so if that snapshot date hasn't occurred yet, then the spend down doesn't work. Right. So one of the things that we're going to want to make sure people, think that they've got this, they've Googled it, and so they need to spend down, or they talk to a social worker, or they talk to somebody in the billing office, they say spend down half of your assets, or spend down to $100,000, or whatever they said to spend down to, and then they try to do that, but the snapshot date hasn't occurred, and the spend down only counts if we've already got past that thing called a snapshot date. Okay. So, and the bottom line is we shouldn't do that anyway, because I can protect 100% of the assets in favor of the healthy spouse if we do a proper plan. For a singles person, yes, there might be some kind of spend down because, like I say, if we're only protecting about half, there could be some kind of spend down, but it's a very strategic spend down. We want to make sure that all of the things line up so that we are able to protect the half. Okay, so that's the idea behind that. I know I didn't get into all the details of how that exactly works. I've done other webinars that kind of explain that in a little bit more detail, but the purpose of this was just kind of focus on the things that people shouldn't do. All right. Number 5 is believing that Medicaid means bad care. So, I hear this all the time. Oh, I would never put my spouse, I would never put my parent in a place that takes Medicaid. Those places are awful. Are there places that are awful? Yes. Are there some places that take Medicaid that are awful? Yes. Are there some places that don't take Medicaid that are awful? Yes. Okay. But there's also good places that provide good care. It's all relative to the extent that it's never going to be up to everybody's standards, but that consistently we feel that they've been given good care, and some of them take Medicaid, right? And so it's not about what's interesting about this is people think that, oh, you wouldn't take Medicaid unless you're just a terrible facility that nobody wants to go to. No, that's not the case at all. The one place around here in the Tri-County area that we often are working out of, the place that is probably the most popular, that has usually the longest wait list, they take Medicaid and have no problem with it, and it's the most popular that has the longest wait list, and they take Medicaid, obviously. So the idea, I have this little chart that kind of shows what we're talking about here. So if you follow this chart along, I know it might be hard to see on the screen, but if you follow this chart along, we go through home and independent, home with care, independent living, adult foster care, assisted living, memory care, skilled care, which is nursing home, and hospital. And then the 3 last columns are, can we get PACE, which is a Medicaid program to pay for home care? Can we get My Choice Waiver, which is a Medicaid program to pay for home care? Or can we get nursing home care? And what you see is that on the last column, all of them say no, except this skilled care facility. So when people say, oh, it's only the bad facilities that take Medicaid, no, you're misunderstanding how this works. What it is that it's how it's licensed. So assisted livings, they're bad assisted livings and there's good assisted livings, right? None of them take nursing home Medicaid. Okay, they might be able to work with PACE or waiver, possibly, but they don't take full Medicaid, meaning it pays for room and board. Neither PACE nor waiver pay for room and board. So it's only that last column that pays for both room and board and care, right? And so assisted livings aren't licensed to take Medicaid. So it doesn't mean that it's the bad facilities. So we've got some really nice facilities, the fancy ones even, that take Medicaid, okay? And that's the idea here, is that there's some bad ones that take Medicaid and there's some good ones that take Medicaid. A lot of the newer ones are, they're very fancy. They serve Starbucks coffee, they have all this stuff and they got windows. It's really nice inside and all of that. But the bottom line is it's not about the quality of the facility as to whether they take Medicaid or not. It's the type of facility. So any place at this point in our, for the most part, any place that does rehab, Medicare rehab, so physical therapy, occupational therapy, and you go there to live there and they give you physical therapy, occupational therapy, things like that, is probably going to take Medicaid. Now there's some in Oakland County and other counties in Michigan that don't, but the majority of ones that take Medicare also take Medicaid, not because they're generous, not because they decide that this is their goal, and not that they're even going to tell you that they take Medicaid. A lot of places won't actually volunteer that to you, but that's the way it's licensed. Okay, so under federal law and now under Michigan law, if you take Medicare for rehab, for physical therapy, for occupational therapy, for those types of things, you have to take Medicaid for long term. Now there were some places that got grandfathered in. Okay, they got grandfathered in, meaning that they had some beds that took Medicare but don't take Medicaid, and they allowed that. They allowed them to be grandfathered in. But the majority of them take both. Okay, they take Medicaid if they take Medicare. So I just wanted to point that out because that was one of the common myths, is that If you have to go to a Medicaid facility, it's going to be awful, and that's not the case. I do have one bonus, and the bonus is that believing that a revocable trust or a domestic asset protection trust will protect your assets from nursing home costs. Okay, I do this all the time. I have lots of classes and presentations I do, and people will come up afterwards, and we talk about that 5-year look back and things like that, and they come up afterwards and they say, well, I set up my trust 7 years ago, so I should be fine, right? Nope. No, you're not fine. And I mean, at least from the standpoint of protecting assets. And the reason I say that is a revocable trust, which is the standard trust that people use. It's like a will. That's what most people have when they say they have a trust, is a revocable trust. Does not protect assets from nursing home. Doesn't matter if it was in there 10 years, 7 years, 3 years, whatever. If it's in a revocable trust, meaning you're still in charge of it, you get to spend your money however you want to spend your money, which is what a revocable trust is, that doesn't count. Okay. The other thing, and this is really more for the lawyers and maybe some business, financial advisors or accountants, they heard this thing, they were really excited when Michigan came up with this thing they called a domestic asset protection trust. So we now have a Michigan domestic asset protection trust. Guess what? Doesn't work. Doesn't work, at least for nursing home issues, right? It works for lawsuits and small percentage of things, but it's really for rich people, right? The domestic asset protection trust is for the really rich people, and they're going to set aside some money in a domestic asset protection trust. And honestly, they have very little use for anything that I do and my clients would need, and so people will talk about the Nevada trust or the South Dakota trust or the Alaska trust, and now we have the Michigan trust, and it's like, nah, none of that. None of that's going to work for Medicaid purposes, for veterans purposes, for asset protection in the ways that most people would maybe need asset protection. And so and there's lawyers out there that they get excited because they hear domestic asset protection trust, and now Michigan has one. They say, oh, great, now we'll be able to do that and protect the assets from the nursing home. Doesn't work, okay? It's not set up that way. Now, I'm not saying there's not trusts that do. Many of you hear me talk about the lockbox trust, which is just kind of a made-up term, lockbox trust, but we do have asset protection trusts that don't qualify under the Michigan Domestic Asset Protection Trust. It's just provides asset protection within the trust, and so I often refer to that as the lockbox trust. And so that can, under the right circumstances, protect assets from the nursing home, and we do those frequently. And there's some rules, and it's not for everybody, and it can't protect retirement assets. Okay, we can't put retirement assets in an asset protection trust, but there's a difference between a Michigan Domestic Asset Protection Trust and the asset protection trust that we do. Okay, but I say that mainly because there's lawyers out there that are thinking, okay, we're helping people with nursing home by doing this Michigan Domestic Asset Protection Trust. Doesn't work. It's not effective. Okay, so instead of 5 mistakes that people make for asset protection, I gave you 6. I gave you a bonus round, and we're going to see, Savannah, if we have any questions. Otherwise, I'm going to tell you how if you need more information about this, or if you want to make sure that you're protected, how you can do that.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. And right now I don't see any questions. So if you do have a question, this is your last call. Go ahead and pop it in that chat box, and we'll be sure to answer it now, or even after the webinar, we can reach out to you as well. Now, as Bob mentioned, we do have a way for you to contact our team very easily to go ahead and get started if you have questions, or if you already know you'd like to meet with one of our attorneys. So you should have an email coming to you in about maybe 10-15 minutes. Inside of that email, you'll actually have instructions for scheduling what we call an interview or an intake call with our client services director, Katie. So during this interview call, you'll be able to ask Katie questions about our firm, about our process, about our attorneys. And then Katie's also going to ask you some questions about your concerns, and then just some questions that might help us get a better idea of what it is that we can best help you with and who the best attorney would be to meet with you. We have 3 attorneys on staff, and each one kind of specializes in their own area so that we can really provide you with the best, most targeted service to help. So again, that email would be coming to you in maybe the next 10 minutes, 15 minutes at the most. And there's a very quick way for you to schedule. You'll just click the button in the email. It'll take you to a calendar. You'll choose a day and a time that works best for you. And Katie will give you a call at that day and time. And that's it. So let me check one more time and see if any questions were snuck in at the last minute, and we don't have any. So if you do have a question, I encourage you to reach out to our team.
Savannah, I do see one question there from Roosevelt. It says, please explain estate recovery.
Oh,
And
all
so
right.
estate recovery is what happens after you die. So, and it doesn't have to. In other words, if you haven't done things to protect yourself properly, they can come back, and any assets that go through probate or any assets that were still in your name and continue to be in your estate after you die, the state can come back and recover those to pay for whatever Medicaid had paid for. I can tell you that doesn't happen with our clients. When we protect assets, we protect it not just for your lifetime, but afterwards too. We're making sure we're coordinating and making sure that estate recovery is not going to be able to come back later and recover those assets. So so that's estate recovery.
All right, thanks, Bob, and great catch there. Sorry about that, Roosevelt. Now, if you do have any other questions, again, I encourage you to just reach out to our team. In that email that's coming out to you, you can also just reply. If you have a quick question, it's coming from me. It'll be from Savannah, and I'll be more than happy to help find an answer to your question as well, or connect you to the right person. If you're watching in the future, the webinar replay, you can also always give us a call at 810-694-9000, or you can always email info@mannorlaw.com. Thanks so much for attending, everyone, and I hope you all have a great day. We'll see you next week.